We're by the edge of the sea, or maybe it's the ocean. It's round about dawn, little light creeping up, and there's the sound of a boat drawing up onto the shingle. We can actually tell it's an inflatable. And there are some nervous looking figures getting out of the boat and stumbling up on shore. And then immediately they're met by another group of people with flashlights in uniforms. There's some words exchanged and they are taken into custody. And this is a common enough scene around Europe, the United States, many countries. The question is, where do we draw the line? So are these a flood of potential terrorists, freeloaders, coming to steal our resources, our scarce housing, services, and destroy our way of life? Or are they desperate and vulnerable human beings, deserving of our warmth, our kindness, of sharing freely all that we have? How do we know? Why do we pitch ourselves one side of the line or the other? How do we draw the line? You see, if we see them as us, even though they're a bit different, then of course they're like us. We should share. But if they're not like us, if they're different enough to be a them, then they'll be the other side of the line, beyond the pale, potentially dangerous, threatening. So how are we going to draw that line? Where are we going to put it? If you want to look at the most useful predictor of anybody born on this planet, still the most useful predictor of how long they're going to live, what their level of education is going to be, what their life's chances are in every sense, is simply where they're born. And first off, and most substantially, which country they're born into, which country they become a citizen of by birth. Works, of course, locally as well, whether you're born on the right side of the tracks or the wrong side of the tracks, whether you're in the banlieue around Paris, whether you're in a sink estate or a project, or whether you're in a nice middle-class neighbourhood. But we'll stick with the idea of the nation, the country for a moment, because it seems only fair to ask, why are some nations so much richer than others? And just as we have self-stories about ourselves, so we have self-stories about countries. And most countries' self-story, well, it's basically that we are the best. Others are fine. They have their qualities, their good points, their virtues, but, we are the best. But do we mean best? Well, what do we mean by best anyway? we have this little old-fashioned these days, but still this wonderfully ambiguous, ambivalent phrase in English of the great and the good, which links power with goodness, and power and goodness with the ability to do things, we'll call it, for want of a better word. And of course, part of our national and European and Western story is about the importance of meritocracy. People rise through their abilities, through their talents, through their hard work. And those who don't are simply lesser. But of course we equally know, if we're prepared to be honest and if we're prepared to look ourselves as citizens in the face, that actually our rich nations are rich precisely because over the last, 300-400 years, they were the best at the destruction of the natural world. They were the best at the expropriation, which is a posh word for stealing the resources of other cultures. They were the best at exploiting the possibilities, taking advantage. Sometimes this even took the form of slavery. Sometimes it took the form of genocide. But it enabled the accumulation of vast wealth, vast resources upon which all of us rely today. But again, our self-stories are always about how good we are, how great we are, whether that's our economic system, our political process, the character of our people. But when we come back and we say, okay, the biggest and most effective predictor of who this child, this wonderful baby, might or might not grow up to be, the relationships they might have, the opportunities they might have, is still simply the country they're born in. What does that say about the individual? Again, at an individual level, we want to talk about meritocracy. We want to talk about talents, gifts, hard work. But if it really is as simple as where I'm born, what's that to do with me? Is that just pure random chance? Let's take a different example, one that's obviously purely down to talent. Suppose I have a magic left foot. The kind of left foot that can control the ball, pass, shoot, straight around, straight through half a dozen opponents. Wow. Perfect. The perfect player. Well, that's obviously my foot and to do with my talent. Yes, but. In fact, two yes buts. Yes, but number one. That golden foot is meaningless. It's worthless without there being the game of football. Soccer, if you're in the States. Without the game of there being football to play. That I can pursue it as a career relies on the professionalisation of football. I don't think we can imagine that players these days are just so much better, so much more talented, so much harder working than they were, say, 50 years ago. But of course, the material rewards they receive are off the scale by comparison. Well, that's down to, it's down to the sale of media rights, finally, isn't it? And merchandising and marketing. Not saying that's right, not saying that's wrong, but my left foot is worth precisely nothing unless that whole system is in place. That social system. My left foot is only wonderful in comparison, is only wonderful because there's a place for it to be special within our society, our culture. And secondly, where does this foot come from? Is it something I chose? Well, no, obviously not. Did I arrange the genetics so that the bones and muscles and the nerves would align in such a way? Obviously not. Just say that, is there somewhere in which something about me made it that my eye and my foot will coordinate it a certain way or give me a good tactical brain? I mean, maybe I had supportive parents, maybe I didn't. Maybe I'm exactly the right height, exactly the right build, maybe I'm not. None of this is to do with any kind of essence of me. It's all to do with the accident of being this person in this place at this time that will allow me to be this, will allow me to excel, will allow me to be marvellous. And so on what grounds other than the purely arbitrary, the conventional, is this worth more? This is actually, I think, a brilliant demonstration of what, or one aspect of what in Zen, in Buddhism, we mean by emptiness. These qualities are real, they're not imaginary. You know, if I've got the golden foot, I've got the golden foot. But it's only golden, it's only magical in relationship to the whole world, which makes that what it is. It's conventional in that sense. It's to do with relationship. And weirdly, quite counterintuitively, for a lot of purposes, relationship turns out to be quite a good synonym for what we mean by emptiness in Zen and Buddhism. Of course, there's one more. Binary inequality. That's a yes or no, an either or, which is very relevant to my left foot. When I was born, did the midwife, the doctor, look at me and say, "It's a boy," or "It's a girl"? Because that too still does, make the world a difference to my left foot. As we know, and famously so, it was illegal for women to play proper competitive football in this country, the United Kingdom, for many years. One of the really interesting developments culturally recently has been the sudden explosion of professional women's soccer in this country. Why? Well, obviously because money people have worked out they can make money out of it. But that has enabled the most wonderful flourishing of a whole new aspect of the game and a whole new way of being for young women. Suddenly, when I'm just walking in the local park, I see boys and girls playing football together. Seriously, with respect for each other. Not with the girls standing around not quite knowing what to do, but no. They're in there and they're respected by the boys, and there is a seriousness. And it's a marvellous thing to see. I'm no passionate football fan myself, but this is a phenomenon. This is something. So yes, that difference makes a difference. How do we decide as individuals? How do we decide as a culture, as a society? Which differences make a difference? women weren't allowed to play soccer because they weren't suited for it. It wasn't good for them. We're taking one difference, and from that we're developing a whole field of cultural value. And we do that constantly and in so many different respects. Now, there's a sense in which all these formal inequalities, all these differences that we collectively have chosen to make a difference, are always about hierarchy. We could even say domination in some form or another. And naturally follows from this that they will affect the health, the life expectancy, the education, all of life's possibilities, whether you're on the us side or the them side. And of course, in reality, all of us move freely throughout the course of a day from being an us to a them. Of course we do, there and back again. Some of us find ourselves more on the them side, and some of us find ourselves more on the us side, and that frames our experience and what we expect of life, what we think our possibilities within this life actually are. But we know, because it's been demonstrated again and again, that the more inequality we have, the more inequality we get. And while we might think, and in a certain sense it's even true, that it's our greed, our need for more, and we've talked about that, driving this inequality. Yes, I need more than you. Get down, get out of my way. It's actually truer, I think more true, the other way around. That actually inequality drives greed. The more inequality we see around us, the greedier we get, the more closed. And if we want to talk about, as I like to, walls of our mind, actually somebody came up with a comment, mind-forged manacles, said William Blake. Yes, exactly. Really nice. Again, nails it. Mind-forged manacles. These lines that we draw, these walls that we build around ourselves. No, I have this view, not that view. I am right and you are wrong. The more inequality we have, the more this cycles, spirals, feeds back onto itself. The higher our walls, the more we draw inwards, the more defended we become. But because it's us drawing these lines, we always have the ability to challenge them also. My lines are not automatically the same as your lines. We don't place them in exactly the same place, and that's why some of us will see figures scrambling off a boat and see freeloading terrorists. Others will see vulnerable human beings in absolutely desperate need of our support. Of course, again, it's quite subtle within that, quite refined. What if these people arriving are blonde and blue-eyed white people? This is something which came up with the war in Ukraine. Obviously, actually, they were stereotypically blonde, blue-eyed, white women. Exactly the kind of human being which we white men are, I'll say, programmed to feel sympathetic towards at the very least. Would it be different? Well, of course it's different. If they're brown men, possibly Muslim, possibly African, probably don't have that good an English. All of these things, where are we going to draw the line? And how sharp is this line? How absolute is this line? How far is this line an adjustment? How far does it really divide us? And what does this say about what's going on in this body, in this space, in this moment, as part of my world? I think what we can say, and this is kind of half of the basic point, in a world where we see life as a competition of all against all, and the more extreme the inequality we see around ourselves, and the more we see that inequality increasing, then the more separate ourselves, the harder, sharper the edge between self and other, the more I'll feel that I really need to hang on to what I have. And that seems to be exactly the same if I have very little, or if I actually have, relatively speaking, obviously, a hell of a lot. And interestingly, research seems to show that people always underestimate where they sit in the kind of level of material wealth and what that brings. And why? Well, because we're always looking upwards to where we think we should want to be. In a world of less inequality, so that's less absolute differences, but also where these either-or inequalities are more softly drawn. And I suppose women's soccer is a lovely example of that. Oh, you mean women can play football? It doesn't damage their health. What a surprise. How wonderful. We get a game that's as good as the men's. Oh, who knew? Who could possibly have imagined? We lessen that either or. We see, no, it doesn't really apply here, does it? And we find in so many areas of life there is that gentle undoing. And then in other areas, a hardening, a crystallizing. In a world of all against all, we're naturally going to be defensive. We're naturally going to be fearful. We're naturally going to feel, I need more. And that's entirely reasonable. And that's not all we are, and that's not all we feel. But that fear, virtually inescapable, I think. And I think really owning up to that fear is probably a vital first stage for what we're trying to do. After we were talking about fear, I had a mail. Just share you a little bit of it. My daily koan, or maybe the reason I came to practice, was how to deal with being a failure. In a society that values wealth and success and the pursuit of money, status and possessions, I am clearly failing and continue to do so. This is all fine if I just lived in my own Buddhist bubble, but I have a family to support materially. How do I practice being a failure with my children? How do I practice with my worries? My wife might dislike the fact I don't bring home big money. I'm supposed to, that's what she's supposed to want. How do I practice with knowing I probably earn the least amount of money out of all the guys in my neighbourhood? I've struggled with this for years and turned to religion to find some way to deal with it. But then I've noticed I can use my practice to think, well, I don't earn as much money as so-and-so down the road, but I'm much better than him, really, because I'm a spiritual person. It's easy to fall down the spiritual greed path too. I think the precepts in the Sangha can help to see when I'm doing this, to remember that the real reason I'm practicing is not to be better than others, but rather to love and care more about everything and everyone. And I think that pretty much nails it. You can see the fear. You can see the not being satisfied with the fear, the not being satisfied with just going along with things, doing what I'm supposed to. Because that's not okay either. And yet, this is where I find myself. And then the way out seems to be by being good, by being better. But then I realise that's playing the same game in a different way. So how do we live in this world that we share? What are the possibilities of sharing freely? Well, as I said, I think sharing, acknowledging that fear, sharing that fear, being upfront about it, is a vital start. And acknowledging that sense in which, yeah, in this game we're supposed to be playing, we're all failing. Hopelessly over and again, if, we really need to realise this. And if it's a question of people like me, of us, or people not like me, them, which side do I put myself on? Well, actually I have to realise that really I'm all of this, because, as I think what I was reading just now shows, I'm not one thing. There's not just one thing going on here. I'm this and I'm that and I'm that and I'm that. I'm different. I'm the other, as well as being, obviously, the same. Now, if I can begin to get my head around that in me, I don't need everybody else to be like me or not like me. Self and other cease to be so exclusive. They don't merge. It's not just all one. But we can acknowledge and we can experience both similarity and difference within ourselves, within each other, within the world. Then we've got the possibility of a world that's not us and them, whoever we think we are and whoever we think they are. Do you have to look like me? Do you have to think like me? Can I let you be you and respect you and show you kindness and love you for it? And if I can do that, then hey, maybe I can let me be me and get off my own back for a change.